Okay, Candace, so you and I are horse lovers. It's
Yeah.
NFR.
It's NFR, which, if you don't know, stands for the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas. I promise we're not going to talk about that. There's other more qualified people out there.
And I was just saying to you that outside of all the plants I've learned through elixirs, the plant that probably comes to mind that we don't use in a product is hay. And you were like, well, actually,
We can talk about hay.
We can talk about hay.
I mean, if you're looking for advice on what is the best hay to feed your horse, I'm not your person.
Move along.
Move along. But we can talk about spiritual properties of, like, hay is grass, right? So
Yeah.
there's the different grasses that make up hay. Again, I'm not a feedstock expert, so I'm not going to go into that. But grasses is a general category, and this can be like your lemongrass, which is a very popular essential oil, like the Simapogan, sweetgrass, all of those things. So I'm going to talk about grasses generally, are all about boundaries. And boundaries is one of my favorite topics, turns out. When I first learned about boundaries, I thought, well, I didn't even know what they were. Like, what's a boundary? And so boundary is about what you're going to allow into your field, your consciousness, your world, and what aren't you going to allow into your world. So boundaries can be physical. They're doors and locks on the houses, but they're also so important to have mental, emotional, and spiritual boundaries. And I had no idea what those were, and I had to learn about them. So all of the grasses are going to be supportive for you in either understanding what boundaries are, helping you to set boundaries, helping you to feel what is an appropriate boundary and what isn't. So when you come to a place of wanting to establish boundaries in your world, it really comes down to, like, well, what feels right? Like, there's no objective boundaries that you have to set in your life. It comes down to your choice of what feels right for you and what doesn't feel right for you. So, like, I remember the first example I remember thinking about with boundaries was like, okay, say somebody borrows your car and you've given them permission and they borrow your car, they have it all day, they don't tell you when they're going to come back and with it, and they bring it back and it's dirty and it doesn't have any gas.
Boy.
How does that feel? Not great.
Yeah.
Right? But if you don't, so here's what I would have done 10 years ago. I would have been like, that's fine, they're a friend, no big deal, and left it. Even though deep down I was really feeling like, that doesn't feel right to me. Because I wouldn't have known what to say. It would have felt awkward. I would have been like, oh, if I say something to me, they're not going to like me, they're going to be mad at me, or whatever that is. So boundaries are a journey. I don't want to go too far down in that. Except to say, I think actually the best book that I read when I was first learning about boundaries is called Where to Draw the Line, and the author is Anne Catherine.
Good memory.
Yeah, Anne, well, I don't remember how to spell Anne. I don't remember if it's with an E or without, but Catherine is with a K.
Okay.
So Where to Draw the Line by Anne Catherine. You can absolutely find it wherever you find books.
Yeah.
And
Wherever books are sold.
but the fascinating thing about grass is all grasses, not cannabis, that's a different topic, is
cannabis a grass?
Well, people call it grass. They used to
I guess they
slang.
do.
I don't know if people still call it that. Because it's certainly not a grass, not part of the grass family.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
how it got that name.
Huh, okay.
Anyways.
We may or may not find that out.
It's about boundaries, right? And like sweetgrass, for instance, is really about maintaining spiritual sacred boundaries, which is why it was burned before people would. It was burned in a really sacred way, and it was about establishing. It was about setting up that space as a sacred space before people would go into ceremony.
Right.
So it was setting the intention of what was going to be allowed into that space, allowed into that ceremony, allowed into that interaction, and what wasn't.
Right. So selfish question.
Yeah.
I was taught, like, back in college to smudge, like to do a sage.
Yeah.
And then do a sweetgrass afterwards because you, like, cleared and elevated the energy, and now you're kind of putting a fence around it.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
is that
yeah.
what you? Yeah.
Putting fence around is a great way to think about that. And different traditions are going to have their specific practices, but that makes so much sense to me when I look at it from what the properties of those plants are. So your sage is generally going to raise and elevate the energy of your space, And then, yeah, like you said, the sweetgrass is going to put a fence around it to say that this is sacred space.
Yeah.
So anything that hasn't been cleansed or invited in is not allowed in.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Easy peasy.
So those are grasses. I don't know how that relates to hay, other than hay is grasses, but I just think that's so interesting that that's what they do, that they're all about boundaries.
Yeah.
And if you're new to the word boundaries, God bless you, good luck. It's, I think, one of the most important concepts I've learned about in the last 10 years for myself.
Yeah, for sure. And maintaining your energy and keeping it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It sounds so funny, and it sounds like such a weird thing to think about in terms of like, well, how does my energy go to somebody else? And like, is that appropriate or not appropriate? Or am I taking on other people's energy? And it does. It sounds weird when you first hear about it, but I think it's absolutely one of the most vital things that I've learned about for myself in the last 10 years. And I'm still learning about them, and still, because nobody takes you aside in like grade 3 or grade 4 or when you're young and says like, here's how you like
Set a boundary.
kindly and elegantly set a boundary.
Yeah. It's sort of innate once you
Yeah.
learn it, because like we're familiar with locking our doors and our windows, and we know that if someone is being nasty on Instagram, to block them, and that's a boundary. But when
Yeah.
it's like person
When
to
it's-
person,
It gets a little bit
it's a little bit
trickier.
more of like an acquired
Yeah.
skill.
And then what it does kind of force you to do, or at least for me, was to look at what were the underlying beliefs that I had that caused me to not want to set a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And they always come down to like self-worth, self-value, self-esteem, all of those things. So I think
Which cornflower helps with? We just learned.
which cornflower helps with. So you can see how we can build these, but that the nice thing about grasses is that they're super helpful and supportive for you as you're learning about that. Or even if you don't want to learn about it, but you kind of feel, like you said, innately, like we know when our boundaries have been violated, that any of those grasses, and it's typically the flower of the grass if you're looking specifically for the energetic and spiritual property, not always. Sweetgrass, of course, is an exception. It's nice to know that there's tools that are available to us that can be supportive. If that's something where you're just like, I constantly feel like my boundaries are being violated. Probably you're not going to put that sentence together that way, but like you just get that ick feeling from people and you don't know what to do with it. My example of someone borrows your car and brings it back and it's dirty and there's no gas in it. And you're like, ugh. Like you just kind of feel blah about it.
Yeah.
And then what do I do?
It's draining.
It's draining.
Mm-hmm.
So there's support from the plant world, of course there is, because I don't think in the 1,600 plants we've covered, you can think of a situation that, you know, we haven't been provided for in some way in the plant world for support and tools, and that is, I think, so exciting and wonderful, and it's obviously why we talk about it forever, but I'll leave it there.